my sister wives that I'm leaving.
By the time the Brown family finally unraveled, the world was fixated on the very dramatic exit of Christine and Kody's public unraveling. But through it all, calm, composed, and heartbreakingly silent was Janelle. For years, Janelle had been the quiet backbone of the sister wives family. She wasn't the loudest or the most emotional. She was the one who held things together when everyone else fell apart. She worked long hours, handled finances, and raised her kids with quiet strength. While Kody and his other wives struggled with jealousy, faith, and emotional chaos, Janelle focused on survival. She believed that loyalty was her duty, and faith required sacrifice. Yet loyalty can only last so long when love stops showing up. But the cracks in Janelle's relationship with Kody didn't materialize overnight. They started off slowly, small disagreements, missed conversations, emotional distance masquerading as independence. Kody used to refer to Janelle as his steady one, the wife he didn't have to worry about. But that became a curse. For while Kody was off chasing emotional validation from his other wives, Janelle was left to manage everything else. The pandemic just revealed what was broken. Kody's strict rules, his obsession with control, and standing aloof from his children became too much for Janelle to ignore. Her sons felt abandoned, seeing the favoritism, double standards, and emotional manipulation that had been buried beneath religious duty. When Janelle refused to kick her boys out during COVID, a demand Kody made because they didn't obey his rules, everything changed. That was the moment Janelle realized her loyalty was no longer love. It was submission. She didn't scream or fight. That wasn't her way. Instead, she stepped back and started watching, really watching the man she'd shared her life with for nearly 3 decades. The way he spoke to her, the way he blamed her for everything, the way he used faith to justify his coldness. It wasn't the Kody she married. Or maybe it was, and for the first time in her life, she saw him clearly. For years, Janelle had been Kody's most logical, most cooperative partner, the one who handled the finances when nobody else wanted to, the one who built her own home, made sure the kids had food on the table, managed while Kody's attention was elsewhere. She never asked for romance. She asked for respect. But that was the one thing she never got. The moment Christine left, Kody directed his frustration toward Janelle. He claimed she had taken Christine's side, that she wasn't loyal, and that she wasn't respecting his authority. But what Kody hadn't realized was that Janelle had stopped fearing him long ago. She didn't need his approval. She already had been living independently for years. The only thing left to lose was the illusion of a marriage that hadn't existed in a long time. Their last argument, the one viewers are witnessing on screen, wasn't just a fight about rules or loyalty. It was the collapse of years of silent suffering. When Kody said, "You're gaslighting me," and Janelle fired back, "You're not listening," it wasn't about COVID or family dynamics. It was about years of being unheard. That was the final straw for Janelle. When she told Kody, "I'm done," she didn't mean just with the fight. She meant with the entire structure, the spiritual marriage, the constant guilt, the emotional imbalance. For the first time in her adult life, Janelle chose herself. And the silence after wasn't a vacuum. It was freedom. After the separation, emotional videos didn't pop up, nor were long statements written. She didn't throw accusations or demand sympathy. Instead, she did what she had always done. She got down to work. She focused on her children, her business, and her peace. It was not easy. The family she had built her life around was falling apart publicly, and the relationships among wives were broken beyond repair. Christine had left for Utah. Mary was isolated, and Robin was desperately clinging to whatever remained. Kody, meanwhile, was spiraling angry, defensive, and bitter. Janelle watched from a distance, not with hatred but clarity. For years, she had tried to make the plural marriage work. She believed that with her staying steady, everyone else would find balance too. But now she saw the truth. Some structures aren't meant to be fixed. What gave Janelle her strength wasn't in staying, but in knowing when to let go. Her faith had always been rooted in personal responsibility and independence. She, unlike the others, never sought her worth through Kody's approval. That was what made her dangerous to his control, that independence. And when she finally decided to walk away, she didn't ask permission. She simply refused to keep participating in something that no longer brought peace. The world watched as Janelle's calm composure became a symbol of quiet rebellion. She didn't tear the family down with words. She did it with silence. That silence spoke louder than any argument. It said, "I don't owe you my suffering anymore." For the first time in decades, Janelle's future belonged to her. No shared schedules, no divided attention, no hierarchy disguised as faith. Just her, and the possibility of a life that didn't revolve around being the steady one. But in that freedom lies another kind of pain. She had to give up the family that she helped build, which was painful. She missed the good memories, the shared laughter, the sense of purpose that once existed. But she knew that staying would have meant slowly losing herself. And she had already spent too many years giving away pieces of her peace for the sake of unity. When starting this new phase of her life, Janelle wasn't seeking revenge, let alone redemption. What she was looking for was balance, something she had never really known. In the quiet after the storm, Janelle found something the show never showed clearly. Peace doesn't come from holding it all together. Sometimes, it comes from finally letting everything fall apart. And for the first time, she was not afraid to start over. Because when the family fell apart, Janelle didn't. She just started over. When the cameras stopped rolling and the world moved on to Christine's new life and Kody's anger, Janelle quietly began to rebuild. There was no press release, no teary confessional, just a woman standing in the ruins of something she once believed in, choosing to rise instead of crumble. For years, Janelle had been the picture of strength inside the Brown family, not because she was loud or dramatic, but because she endured. She was practical, logical, and endlessly patient. But endurance, she realized, isn't the same thing as happiness. For years, she had endured being unseen, unheard, and undervalued. She was tired of surviving. She wanted to live. In the months following her separation from Kody, Janelle felt suspended in a strange state of in-between. She wasn't married, but wasn't single. She was spiritually disengaged, but emotionally rebooting. The rules she used to live by, obedience, unity, sacrifice, no longer pertained. There was no guidebook for this type of liberty. So she started small. She made her coffee, opened her journal, and wrote whatever came to mind every morning. Some days it was gratitude. Some days it was grief. But slowly, she started hearing her own voice again, a voice that had been drowned out by years of compromise. The first step toward independence for Janelle wasn't physical, it was emotional. She stopped asking herself what Kody would think, what the wives would say, what the church would approve. She began making decisions based on what she wanted. For a woman who had spent decades being part of a system that discourages individuality, that was no small thing. She realized how much of her life had revolved around managing Kody's moods. When he was angry, she adjusted. When he was distant, she worked harder. And when he was kind, she felt hopeful. For so long, her immediate emotional world had orbited his approval. She didn't know how to exist independent of it. Now, though, with space between them, she felt something unfamiliar relief. Her children were her anchor. They had seen her strength long before she did. Every day they remind her that she doesn't need any permission from anyone to be happy. Her sons, who have been in the middle of Kody's anger and control in the past, are standing beside her today in quiet pride. Her daughters, strong and independent, mirror the resilience of their mother. The family she had raised had become her safe place, something Kody's version of unity had never been able to provide for her. Janelle began to spend more time outdoors. The wide, endless Arizona sky became her therapy. She would take long drives without a destination in mind, with only her thoughts and the hum of the car engine. It was on one of those drives that she made a profound realization. She didn't miss Kody. She missed the idea of what she thought they could have been. So long, Janelle had been conditioned to think of herself as a part of the collective. One wife among many, one mother among dozens of children, one soul bound to an eternal principle of plural marriage. Now, she saw herself as something she hadn't in years, an individual. And it terrified her, but at the same time thrilled her. She began to look at her faith differently. The God she once served out of fear and obligation now felt closer, gentler. He wasn't demanding sacrifice anymore. He was offering peace. Janelle had been taught that leaving a spiritual marriage meant failure. But now, she wondered if staying in something that destroyed your spirit was the real sin. Her business became her sanctuary. She threw herself into her work with a kind of focus that felt cleansing. For the first time, she wasn't building something for Kody's approval or the family's benefit. She was building it for herself. Every paycheck, every achievement was proof that she could stand on her own. The world saw glimpses of this transformation, a confident Janelle, smiling in photos, surrounded by her children, speaking softly about peace and self-respect. But what they didn't see were the nights she spent questioning everything. The loneliness of detaching from a life she had built for nearly 3 decades, the ache of realizing the man she once trusted with her soul had stopped being her partner long ago. Healing, she learned, is not about forgetting. Healing is forgiving yourself for staying too long. And so she began to forgive herself, for her silence, for her patience, for all of the times she told herself, "This is just how it is." She stopped looking for closure from Kody. She knew he wasn't capable of giving it. Instead, she started creating her own closure, one act of self-respect at a time. She began to reconnect with Christine, not as co-wives, but as women who had survived the same storm. Their bond grew, rooted in a mutual understanding. They laughed again, not the forced, strained kind of laughter that used to fill family dinners, but the kind that comes when 2 people finally exhale after holding their breath for too long. Together, they reminded each other that to leave wasn't betrayal, but freedom. Meanwhile, Kody was still spiraling. His anger, his defensiveness, his desperate need to assign blame, none of it surprised Janelle anymore. She had stopped expecting him to change. His words rolled off her now like rain off a roof. That's the thing about peace once you taste it. You never go back to chaos willingly. Janelle's calm infuriated Kody. He believed calmness was a form of indifference, but it was strength. She no longer needed to prove her worth to a man who never saw it. Her silence was no longer submission. It was power. People began to notice the difference. "You seem lighter," someone told her once. And she smiled because it was true. Freedom had weight too, but it was the kind you carried gladly. In the silence of her new life, she slowly began to see beauty in solitude. She cooked what she wanted, slept when she wanted, and planned her days without waiting for someone else's approval. She began to dream once more, of trips, of peace, and even maybe love someday, but only if it came freely, not because it needed sacrifice. One evening, sitting under the Arizona stars, Janelle whispered to herself, "I didn't lose a marriage. I found myself." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was true. The life of Janelle since the family fell apart was not a tragedy. It was a quiet revolution, a story of a woman who refused to break, even when everything around her did. She looked up to the wide, endless sky and knew that she needed no husband, title, or spiritual contract to define her worth. She had already proven it by surviving, by rebuilding, by standing alone and still standing tall. For the first time in years, Janelle wasn't waiting for anything. Not for Kody to call. Not for faith to make sense again. Not for life to begin, because it already had. Freedom wasn't instant for Janelle. It came in quiet, uneven steps. On some days, she is unstoppable. On other days, she still woke up expecting to check in with someone who was no longer there. It takes time to unlearn a life built around someone else's approval. After decades in a plural marriage, Janelle had to relearn the basics of being alone, and not just physically. She had to rediscover who she was when she wasn't Kody's wife, when she wasn't part of the sister wives' family, when she wasn't the woman who always made things work for everyone else. The quiet felt weird in the beginning, and the house seemed to be too large, too silent. She would find herself reaching for her phone to text Kody something about one of the kids or a small moment that happened during her day, only to remember there wasn't a need for it. That realization used to pain her, but as time went by, it freed her. Because for the first time in her adult life, Janelle didn't have to explain herself to anyone. She could go wherever she pleased, eat what she wanted, and think for herself without wondering how it would look in a family council. That simple freedom, the right to exist without justification, became sacred. She spent the early months filling herself up with small pleasures, reading by the window with coffee in hand, taking long walks at dusk, when the air was cool and the sky turned purple, calling her kids and talking without interruptions from family politics. She spent time with Christine and laughed like she had not in years. They were healing, both of different wounds, but the ache was the same. Christine had found her happiness again, another chance with love, a new life in Utah. And as much as Janelle was happy for her, she wasn't ready to follow suit. Janelle wasn't looking for romance or a new beginning with someone else. She was still getting to know herself. And that, she realized, was love too. Her healing didn't come through big milestones, but it came through stillness, through mornings where peace didn't feel like a luxury, through nights where loneliness turned into gratitude. For so long, Janelle had equated love with endurance, the ability to stay no matter how bad it got. But now she understood that love wasn't about staying. It was about choosing what was healthy for your soul. That meant distance for her from Kody. He, meanwhile, couldn't fathom it. He called her cold, detached, ungrateful. To him, her strength was rebellion, her calm a means of rejection. But that was only because he had based his whole sense of self-worth on control. Janelle's independence made him feel powerless. She didn't hate him. She had no reason to, really. Anger takes energy, and she had wasted enough of that already. What she was feeling now was closer to indifference, the kind of peace that comes when you no longer expect someone to change. Kody had spent years claiming he wanted unity, but in truth, he wanted obedience. Janelle's strength had always been a threat to that. Her willingness to speak her mind, to stand by her kids, to question his authority, those were the things he called disrespect. But they were also the things that made her who she was. Now she was done apologizing for that. Her children also were thriving in the space she had given them. They no longer felt torn between their parents. Her sons reconnected with her and once again felt seen and supported by their mother. To her daughters, she became a role model to prove that one could restart at any age, and that dignity and independence were not just survival, but victory. She wasn't the type of woman who needed revenge or some kind of dramatic comeback. She had nothing in the world to prove to anyone. She was merely living quietly, confidently, authentically, and that, in its own way, was more powerful than any amount of confrontation. She started to travel more. At first, shorter trips and then longer ones, to visit her kids, see new places, spend time with water and mountains. She felt closest to God and nature, away from the noise and expectations of organized religion. Out there, faith felt pure again, not something used to control her, but something that connected her to peace. She started caring for her body and mind again, working out, eating better, finding balance. Her health journey became symbolic, not only of physical strength, but also in terms of reclaiming the energy she had put into everyone else. And she began to smile more, not the polite, careful smile that she used to wear at family gatherings, but a real one, the kind that came from inside. Sometimes she'd think about how different her life was now. No plural marriage meetings, no constant compromising, no pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. And though it was lonely at times, she realized she preferred honest loneliness to dishonest companionship. There was a new rhythm to her life, simpler, quieter, more real. She would talk with Christine often, and the two would reflect on how much they'd grown. Christine was blossoming with love again, but never once pushed Janelle to do the same thing. They understood each other. Everyone's healing looks different. Christine had to open her heart to somebody new. Janelle needed to open her heart to herself. As fans speculated about whether Janelle would ever return to Kody, she smiled softly and said, "I can't imagine going back to that life." It wasn't said with bitterness, just finality. She had been there, done that, survived it. There was nothing left for her to prove. What had surprised her the most was how natural peace felt once she stopped fighting for it. All these years she had thought that happiness required an effort, that love had to be earned through sacrifice. But the fact was simpler. Love was supposed to feel safe, not heavy. Sitting on her porch one evening in Arizona, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on all those times when she had implored God for a sign. Perhaps the sign had always been there, in the exhaustion, the heartbreak, the quiet realization that she was meant for more than to survive. "Thank you," she whispered to no one in particular, "for showing me peace was waiting once I let go." And as the last light faded from the sky, Janelle realized something profound. She hadn't lost her family. She had simply stepped out of the version that no longer served her. The love she had for her children, her friends, her faith, that remained. The only thing gone was the control, the guilt, the weight of pretending. For the first time in years, Janelle wasn't surviving inside of someone else's story. She was writing her own. Peace is beautiful, but it's never free. Janelle learned that truth in the quiet of every morning. Freedom may feel like flight, but it always leaves a shadow behind. Hers came in the form of family tension, lost connections, and the deep ache of knowing that peace sometimes costs people you love. Since leaving Kody, Janelle had hoped things would calm down. She had wanted some sort of civil coexistence, respectful distance, maybe even time rebuilding a broken trust. But Kody wasn't made for that sort of quiet acceptance, pride wounded, control slipping. And every time Janelle had shown peace instead of anger, it further enraged him. He called her cold, detached, dismissive. But Janelle wasn't cold, she was tired. Tired of arguing with someone who only listened to himself. Tired of trying to fix something that wasn't broken, just one-sided. She didn't fight back publicly, even when Kody vented to cameras and fans about her disrespect. She knew how the public worked. People wanted drama, not truth. But she also knew time had a way of revealing everything. So she kept silent, not out of weakness but wisdom. Still, silence didn't protect her from the sting of loss. The once large family had felt scattered. The holidays, once chaotic and full of laughter, were now fragmented. The kids were divided, some closer to her, others distant, a result of the tension with Kody. The sisterhood of wives had dissolved. Christine had moved on and found joy. Mary had drifted into emotional solitude. Robin clung to the remains of what she called family, though it was more like a shell of what once was. And Janelle stood between them all, quietly mourning what could have been. She never hated her sister wives, not even Robin, even though they had their differences. She wasn't her enemy, but Janelle couldn't look past how the favoritism had corroded everything. She had watched Kody's affection tilt toward one wife, while the rest of them faded into the background. What was once meant to be a spiritual principle had become a hierarchy of pain. The price for peace was isolation, but that isolation strangely became her sanctuary. It was during the long, quiet days that Janelle would learn how to enjoy her own company again. She found a sense of beauty in routine, morning walks, quiet dinners, video calls with her kids. The emptiness of her home no longer felt hollow. It felt peaceful. She filled the space not with noise, but with intention. There were moments of grief, of course. Times she'd catch herself remembering old family gatherings, when laughter echoed through crowded rooms and love still felt possible. Sometimes she missed that illusion, not because it was real, but because it had once given her hope. Painful as it was, Janelle had learned to make peace with the past. When Christine came to visit one weekend, they sat outside under the Arizona sky and talked about how their new lives were going. Christine was laughing, free, happy, radiant. Janelle smiled. "You look happy," she said softly. Christine nodded. "I am. And you?" Janelle hesitated. "I'm at peace," she said finally. Christine looked at her knowingly. Sometimes peace comes with loneliness. And it was true. Peace had a quiet price tag. In exchange for calm, Janelle had lost community. For independence, she'd lost identity. The world she'd built for nearly 3 decades, the spiritual marriage, the shared children, the united family, was gone. What replaced it wasn't as full, but it was honest. She had to rebuild her faith from the ground up. Not the faith Kody preached, not the one tied to obedience or patriarchal rules, but her own. Private, personal, unspoken. She found God again, not in church or doctrine, but in the simple things. In sunlight, in laughter, in the sound of wind brushing against the desert. There was one day, months after the separation, that Kody called. It wasn't about reconciliation, it was about logistics, finances, property. The tone was distant but sharp. Janelle listened, answered calmly, and hung up. But afterward, she sat in silence for a long time. The conversation had reminded her of how small their connection had grown, reduced to mere technicalities, stripped of all emotion. And yet she didn't feel any sadness. Just closure. Kody was still living in the wreckage of his own making, trying to rebuild an empire on shifting sand. Janelle wasn't angry anymore. She simply understood that some people mistake control for love. He would never see the difference. For her, love was completely different now. It lay in stillness, in independence, in authenticity. And though some people pitied her, referred to her as the one left behind, the one without a man, Janelle knew she was the lucky one. For she had something that the others didn't, peace that was not dependent on anyone else. But peace didn't mean forgetting. She still carried memories, the good ones, the laughter, the children's milestones. Those were hers to keep. What she'd let go of was the weight of expectation, the belief that she had to earn her worth through service, patience, or endurance. With time, Janelle grew stronger in her solitude. She found new friends, new routines, ways to nurture herself anew. She started to garden again, something she had always loved but never had time for. Watching things grow reminded her that healing takes time, that beauty often comes from patience and pain. There were times when loneliness hit harder, birthdays not together, family updates that didn't include her. Still, she knew letting go of dysfunction is not abandonment. It's alignment. Her children remained her anchor. They visited often, called daily, and reminded her that family could still exist without chaos. She had built a different kind of family now, smaller but stronger. Her faith evolved, too. She no longer prayed for Kody's heart to change, or for the family to come back together. Now she prayed for understanding, for strength, for peace to stay even when life got heavy. Janelle's story wasn't about bitterness or revenge. It was about transformation, about how peace comes with a cost, but also a reward far greater than anything she'd known before. She was no longer the woman who held everything together. She was the woman who let go, and discovered that nothing truly worth keeping had fallen apart. That was the real price of peace, the loss of noise, and finding herself. And every time she looked around at her quiet, steady life, her children's laughter, her own calm reflection in the mirror, she knew it was worth every loss. The kingdom had fallen, yes. But Janelle hadn't. She had simply stepped out of it. By the time the world stopped talking about the Browns' implosion, Janelle had already quietly built something new, a life that didn't need defending, a peace that didn't need explaining. She had spent years as a supporting character in someone else's story. But now she was the author, and for the first time in decades, her life belonged entirely to her. She often thought back to the early years, when everything felt so hopeful, when plural marriage wasn't a burden but a belief, a promise that faith could expand love instead of dividing it. Once she really did believe in that dream. If one worked hard enough, loved deep enough, and prayed strong enough, it could work. Time had a way, however, of showing her what devotion without equality looks like. It becomes servitude. Leaving that world wasn't just about leaving Kody. It was about leaving behind an identity. For over half her life, she had been one of the sister wives. Now she was simply Janelle, a woman, a mother, a believer, a survivor. Mornings in her new home were quiet. She'd brew her coffee, watch the sun spill across her living room, and feel something she hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Not forced gratitude, not the count your blessings kind of gratitude that masked pain. Real gratitude. For her children's laughter, for the peace of solitude, for the sound of her own heartbeat reminding her she was still there. Every day presented an opportunity for something new to be created. No more planning her life around family rotation nights or spiritual commitments. For the first time in her life, her time truly was her own. She started reading again books about resilience, about faith, about healing. She wrote in her journal, reflecting on how far she'd come and how much lighter she felt. Freedom wasn't about doing everything differently. It was about doing things authentically. Janelle began to share bits and pieces of her journey online, not to air any dirty laundry, but to show other women it is never too late for a fresh start. The response was overwhelming. Thousands upon thousands of messages came in from women saying they saw themselves in her. The quiet strength, the loyalty, years spent holding together when inside they were falling apart. They called her an inspiration. But Janelle didn't see herself that way. She saw herself as someone who finally did what she should have done long ago, listen to her own voice. She would sometimes drive through Flagstaff, past the places that used to hold so many memories, the property where the family had dreamed of building their forever homes, the empty land that once symbolized unity and faith. She would look at it and feel nothing. Not bitterness, not nostalgia, just peace. For she had finally accepted that not every dream is meant to come true. Christine had her new love, her new marriage, her new joy. Mary was finding her own sense of purpose. Robin was still clinging to what remained, trying to convince herself that everything could be restored. And Kody, he was still fighting ghosts, still blaming everyone but himself. Janelle didn't envy him, she pitied him. While he was still fighting to control the story, she had already turned the page. Her children became her greatest joy. They saw her not as broken, but as brave. They admired her honesty, her strength, her peace. Family dinners with her kids were filled with laughter again, not forced, not cautious, just real. She no longer felt the need to define family by how many people were in the room. Family, she realized, wasn't about size. It was about safety. And for the first time in her life, Janelle felt safe. Her faith had changed too. The God she spoke to now wasn't the God of rules and hierarchy. He was a friend, a listener. When she prayed, she didn't ask for things anymore. She simply said, "Thank you. Thank you for the lessons, for the pain that shaped her, for the peace that came after." At times, she would wonder if she would ever love again. If it did happen, though, things would be different this time. She wasn't looking for a partner to complete her, for she already was whole. She wanted a person to walk beside her, not to lead or follow. She wanted someone to understand that love without freedom is not love at all. Until then, she was content. Truly content. One evening, sitting on her porch, Janelle watched the desert sunset. The sky turned gold, then orange, then a deep crimson, a painting only nature could make. She thought about everything she had survived, the disappointment, the heartbreak, the endless striving to be enough. And she smiled. "I am enough," she whispered. It wasn't a declaration. It was a realization. The peace she felt wasn't loud or triumphant. It was steady, the kind that doesn't need to be seen or proven, the kind that stays. She was thinking about Christine, all their lengthy talks about finding happiness again. She thought of her children, strong and kind, thriving in their own particular ways. She even thought of Kody not with anger, but acceptance. He'd taught her what love isn't, and in doing so had helped her find out what it truly is. Love is not control, not endurance, not sacrifice masquerading as faith. Love is freedom. And Janelle finally was free. Her story wasn't the explosive kind. It was that quiet revolution of a woman who refused to break, who learned that peace was worth the price, and who finally got to build a life that was her own. As the stars started to blink their way into focus, she whispered a small prayer. Not for change, but for gratitude. "Thank you for showing me that even after everything falls apart," she said softly, you can still build something beautiful. Because, in the long run, Janelle didn't only survive the collapse of her family, she managed to transcend it. She walked away, not as the forgotten wife, not as the quiet one, but as the woman who found herself when the world expected her to fall. And that, more than anything, is her legacy.